What do you get when you invite a hobbit to a diversity and inclusion party?
I don't know.
You call it tokenism.
Non-fungible tokenism.
Non-fungible tokenism, right, exactly.
Hello and welcome to The Foretop. It's a roundtable discussion of today's hot button topics in the wine and food world. I am your host, Catherine Cole.
And I am Martin Reyes, Master of Wine. And today we have a special surprise guest for our intro. We have Rachel Grossman, The Foretop's production assistant, here to get us up to speed before we record this episode.
Yeah, Rachel, it turns out that you're not only a fine wine expert, but you also wrote your senior thesis on cryptocurrency. Is that right?
Yeah, so I studied economics when I was at Reed College. And when I was a senior, I wrote my thesis on Bitcoin. This was back in 2015, 2016, when it was, just barely starting to be a thing that people had heard about. And I was just really interested in basically, what is this weird thing, this so-called cryptocurrency. And at the time, it was starting to have these really crazy price fluctuations. So we saw it, going from being worth $60 to $200 to $300. Little did I know at the time it would, shoot up many, many thousands and tens of thousands of dollars. But so I wrote my thesis kind of examining what were the actual factors driving the price there, and could it be considered a currency or a money in a kind of like technical economic sense.
Okay. So I kind of know what I think. I'm not sure if I know what cryptocurrency is, but can you pretend I don't? Can you explain it, how it works with blockchain? Give us some tales from the cryptocurrency.
Yeah, definitely. Starting with the question of like, what is blockchain is a pretty good starting point. I'd say really the easiest way to kind of conceptualize blockchain is like, in the simplest terms, it's a public ledger. So a public record of transactions. Like if you kind of want to think about like, an old school like accounting book or like a checkbook or something, it's just that like record of who's giving money to who, basically. But, the things that kind of make blockchain special, the first thing is that it's decentralized. And so what that means is the process of recording all of those transactions and verifying them. So making sure that everyone is who they say they are and everyone has the amount of money they say they are, like all of those things, instead of being controlled by a bank or a single person who's in charge, basically, the whole network of users verifies all of those things. So basically that responsibility is spread out among all of the many thousands and millions of people that use these things. And then the second thing that's kind of important and special about blockchain is it's more or less irreversible. Let's imagine I have 5 Bitcoins. Like once I were to send you that amount of money, like, that transaction is written into the record forevermore. I can't go back and say, oh no, that never happened, or it was actually 3 Bitcoins or anything like that. Everyone else who uses this technology has that record.
So how does it not get like hacked in? Like if it's digital, people can come in and change the record.
There are other layers to it. Like there's a lot of, very complicated cryptography that's involved that I personally don't understand fully, and I'm not going to go into. But the main mechanism is the fact that it's decentralized. So you would have to hack the entire network of users, which just like is pretty much functionally impossible, given how big these things have and how widespread these things have gotten.
And then I would imagine that if you were to do that, there would be a record enough. Somebody would catch you and say, look, exactly. This happened. This was hacked. So then let's reset everything, or let's erase that guy or that girl or whatever.
Something like that. I'm not entirely sure what would actually be the protocol, but it's basically that process of verification and making sure that everything is, all good is something that is ongoing. Like the only way that you can actually complete a transaction is through going through that verification process. So there are like incentives built in to get all of the users to be kind of constantly participating in maintaining the blockchain.
This is so interesting, and I'm beginning to see why this is of interest to the wine industry, and we will talk about that. But I want to move on to this concept of NFTs, Rachel. And maybe we'll start with this term fiat currency. When I hear the word fiat, I think of a Fiat Cinquecento, which I like to drive when I'm in Europe. But as I understand it, this fiat currency is any currency that can be exchanged, which means it's fungible. And this word fungible is important to know for NFTs.
Okay, yeah. So fun. I saw that. I didn't know how to pronounce. I thought it was like with a FUNG. So like a fun. I thought it was fungible. And I thought I'm still thinking, non fungible or non fungible sounds like it sounds like it can't be turned into a mushroom.
Yeah.
But apparently that's not the answer, right?
Or it sounds really fun.
If something is fungible, it means that like it can be exchanged for like things. And in this context, we're talking about things that have like similar value. So basically, you can exchange, you can exchange $1 for another dollar. You can transfer a $5 bill into 5 $1 bills, and that still has the same value. NFTs, like their fundamental thing is they are unique. And I've heard the analogy thrown around before of like different pieces of art, and I find that to be a pretty useful one. So let's say you're the lucky person that has a collection of Monets, right? Or you're a museum. They're all kind of in that same category. Like you could all consider them sort of, they're all Monets, but one isn't necessarily interchangeable with another. Like one piece of art isn't interchangeable with another, even though they are, both valuable in a similar sense for similar people, for all of those things. So NFTs, basically they're thought of as tokens. So they're basically like digital objects, or like, if you want to get really specific about it, like it's a sort of a string of numbers basically, but it corresponds to something that is unique, that is owned by somebody, and the record of all of those things is written immutably into the blockchain. So, the fact that NFT is a singular object is recorded in this, as we talked about, like public ledger, who owns it, and like, all the different people that have owned it, all of those transactions, those are also written into that public ledger. That's kind of the like very broad level overview. And this kind of brings it to the point where, we're starting to see, and I kind of understand how there would be a connection to the wine industry, particularly in the sector that is really interested in like, very valuable wines and, people that consider themselves wine collectors. That sector is largely worried with verifying authenticity. That's a huge thing. Like if somebody says they're selling like, some really prestigious first growth Bordeaux, like you would like to be very certain that is indeed what they are selling, and that that is what you are, about to spend a lot of money on. The framework of NFTs and of blockchain, it allows for like a really good way of, verifying authenticity, verifying ownership, and recording like the string of transactions. So like, as a really rare bottle might be like exchanging hands, like there can then be a record of that is, much more trusted than other mechanisms for keeping track of things like that we've had in the past.
Okay, so I am really seeing why the wine industry is so excited about NFTs right now. I was very confused about this just a couple of months ago, and I've been trying to read and learn. But Rachel, you've very much enlightened us. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your help with this. And I feel now somewhat ready, thanks to you, Rachel, to talk to our guests. We will be joined in this episode by Michael Juergens, who's a senior partner with a Big Four consulting firm, where he works with international wine businesses. He's also a lecturer at the Paul Marriage School of Business at the University of California, Irvine. He's a certified specialist of wine, a certified sommelier, an author, a stage 2 Master of Wine candidate. He does a lot of things. He's also the owner of SoCal Rum Company and also the founder of Bhutan Wine Company, and is leading development of the wine industry in the Himalayan nation of Bhutan.
Well done, Michael. On the other side, we have Behdad Shahsavari. He spent his career at the intersection of technology and consumer spaces. He has been a partner in management consulting, venture capital, and incubators, co-founder of startups, and a board advisor to companies of various sizes. Now, most importantly for our purposes today, he is co-founder at Club dVIN, which is according to what we know here, it's an NFT wine club focused on experiences in the world of investment grade wine. Okay, so Let's find out what these guys can tell us about how NFTs tie into the wine industry, and let's get this episode started. All right, Mike, as a financial consultant, you work with some of the world's biggest wineries. What are your clients asking you about NFTs? Like, what is your opinion about, should winery owners and operators know about NFTs right now?
So I think we get two kinds of questions, generally speaking. The first one is more informational, like, what the hell is an NFT? Can you explain this to me? And the second type of question, which is perhaps becoming more prevalent, is this: what's the use case? And I facilitated a CFO forum in Napa a little bit ago, and we definitely, the topic of NFTs came up, and it was more I don't understand the use case yet, and I don't think any of us truly do.
I feel like we should add that Mike is sitting outside in a beautiful spot in Portugal, and I'm hearing some birds tweeting, and I love it. But I just thought I'd
Yes,
explain.
I am sitting over the Douro River, and there are birds tweeting outside. And I apologize, I wasn't able to get into my hotel room in time. But I will say there's so much going on in the crypto space right now, just across the board. And I think there are a lot of what I'll call ridiculously stupid NFT use cases. And I think, those get some press coverage. And, if you're a senior executive of a multi-billion-dollar global brand, you're looking at that going like, does this apply to me? And if so, how? Because I'm not sure I get it.
What are some of those ridiculous use cases?
Well, I mean, there are, I'm going to get a kindergartner to draw a pixelated picture of a rock and sell it for $1 million. But if you think about like some of the big issues in wine, authenticity and provenance, being able to take that to the blockchain actually solves both of those problems very effectively and very inexpensively. And so it's not hard to figure out that there are some really business-centric use cases for NFTs as it relates to wine. Matter of fact, recently there was a huge auction in South Africa where they brought some wines to auction. They used a new use case for NFTs, which I thought was super interesting, which is that they sold rare verticals of wine, and the entire vertical had an NFT assigned to it, and also individual bottles had NFTs assigned to them. So you could either, parcel out the bottles with authenticity and provenance, or the entire collection with authenticity and provenance. And I looked at that and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I hadn't seen that before.
To break that down, by authenticity, this is an authentic bottle. This hasn't been counterfeited. And by provenance, it's been stored properly. That's kind of what you're saying.
Well, you don't know, right? You can't tell if it was stored properly, but you at least know who had it and how long they had it, how many times it changed hands. And so that's a really easy use case. The other really valid use case that I see for NFTs in the wine space are the ability to potentially funnel funds back to the creator. And so you got to think about it. Like if I'm Albert de Boulogne and I make a beautiful bottle of DRC and I sell it to somebody I trust for $1,000 who I think is going to appreciate the wine, and the very next day that thing hits the auction market for $10,000, you don't get to participate in that value creation. And then whoever buys that at auction for 10 grand sits on it and sells it again 2 years later for 15 grand. That bottle might change hands 10 times and at the tune of, a couple $100,000. DRC does not get to participate in that wealth creation. But by utilizing certain type of NFTs, they could get a commission on that where every time that sold hands, the actual creator of this beautiful thing could continue to participate in the value creation. For me, like if I'm a producer of wine, like that's a huge, huge benefit for why I might want to think about moving to NFTs for my wine.
Right. So Mike, I can see how high-end producers sell their wines on futures off waiting list. The example you mentioned with Aubert de Villaine, the owner and winemaker of Domaine de la Romanée Conti, the most expensive Burgundy in the world, just for people who don't know what that is. Auctions and all that stuff benefits from NFTs, but and understanding the traceability, you get a cut every time the bottle is sold, etc. From what I understand, but what about ordinary wineries? What might they get out of NFTs? Maybe special club memberships or what?
Yeah, so you think about like let's say you're you're not DRC, and your wines you're selling a $50 Pinot, in Santa Barbara. Probably that winery is trying to create a broader D2C marketplace, and they're utilizing a wine club model to do that. Join my wine club, you get 3 bottles every quarter or every month or whatever the wine club parameters are, but they can cancel at any time. And so the value to the winery is the cost to acquire that wine club participant versus the lifetime value of that member of the wine club. However, if you did that through NFTs, you could do a couple of things. Number one, you could create some exclusive benefits for those NFT holders. And that could be our annual harvest party, our special house cuvee bottling that only goes to people that hold this NFT. But it isn't one of those things that is cancelable. That exists, and it's an asset. And so you would probably get a couple things. One, increased stickiness. And number two, and this is probably much more powerful, is the ability of those to trade on the secondary market. So you think about, like, let's say you wanted to get on Sine Qua Non's mailing list.
Another cult winemaker in California.
Another cult winemaker, right? Or pick any cult winemaker. So you say, oh, here, I'm going to email you my stuff, put me on your list, and then eventually maybe I'll get on into your club. The club's limited. If it's an NFT and I'm a member of the club, I could sell that to you, and then you'd be a member of the club. Today, if I'm a member of the club, and I just cancel, and then somebody else takes my place. So I think if I was a smaller winery, that's the kind of thing I'd be thinking about. Like, what is the right size for my special club? How do I create this community around it? What are the benefits that are offered to it? Is it allocations? Is it special cuvées? Is it events? But you can control it. You can monetize it. You can create incredible stickiness, and you can create value for the members in the sense that they can then sell their membership.
So, Mike, I feel like everything I'm hearing, though, still really just applies to those cult wineries because, when you're talking about those special club memberships, that sort of assumes that demand for a membership outstrips supply. So I'm seeing how this would work for wineries that everyone wants to be on the mailing list, everyone wants an allocation, and there just isn't enough wine. And it may be that this conversation today is just about these ultra luxury wineries, but I'm still curious, is there any reason that kind of your average small family winery making a damn fine bottle of $25 Pinot Noir, should they be worried about NFTs right now? Or is that something that maybe in 10 or 20 years might apply to them?
No, I mean, I think 100% it does. The use cases may be slightly different, right? No one cares about the authenticity and provenance of a box of wine, right? They're just having a good time doing it. But I think if you were that producer, there's other ways that you can create like a gamification. And I'll give you an example. 19 Crimes. It's a $10 bottle of Shiraz blend that sells for $20. Why? Because you can interact with the label on it, and you can get a story about it, and there's 19 different ones, and so you got to collect them all. It's like Pokemon. So I think if I was a smaller winery that sold wine at a lower price point, I didn't have demand outstripping supply, I'd be looking at ways of using NFTs to promote that. And one example might be you create a metaverse, a virtual winery for yourself, and people can go into the metaverse and they can play little games or they can watch videos about the stories of the wine. And when they do, they collect NFTs. It hits their wallet. If you collect, the green one, the yellow one, the blue one, and the red one, you collect the whole set, then you can turn that in for a free bottle of wine when you visit the winery. Or you can get a special guided tour with the winemaker or things of that nature. Instagram, Meta, at some point in time is going to somehow link NFTs to your public persona, your social media persona, and then you can display them on your Instagram account or your Facebook account as badges. I don't know exactly how they're going to do it, right? But they will at some point figure this out. And at that point, maybe there isn't any value other than the social value that comes from like, hey, I did this cool thing.
So this is making me feel like, oh, this is going to make economic stratification even worse because it's going to be the haves and the have-nots, and people are going to pay more and more and more for these cult wines and these cult experiences, and it's going to leave everyone who can't afford it out, and they won't be able to put it on their Instagram profile. I don't know. This is making me a little nervous.
But so think about it. Let's say you're the winery that's doing like the $30 bottles of wine. It's not a cult, or a $20 bottle of wine, whatever it is. I mean, 19 Crimes is $20, but they built this model around it. Let's say you do that, and somehow you're able to create the funnest game. Then the value to the consumer is the status side of it.
So Behdad, let's get you in here. First of all, I know you have something to say about this, but I want that to segue to how does Club dVIN fit into this picture?
I promise Mike and I didn't rehearse this, but Club dVIN is trying to do exactly what Mike said about where the utility is. We're all about creating the community and engagement platform for the industry on the one hand, and on the other hand, really becoming the platform layer that enables tokenization for any commerce. So really two pieces of the business model. One is community around that relatively small set of people that really want to engage deeper in investment grade wines, which is, a small subsegment of the wine world. But the second piece is really creating the tech layer and the token layer, and basically a plug and play platform that wineries can use to create their own communities using NFTs. And there's a lot of people, the vast majority of the wine world will never afford and will never want to pay the kind of rents you have to pay to get a DRC. But there are a ton of wineries and a ton of consumers that really do want to engage with the $30, $25, $50 wines out there. And those winemakers are creating really cool, fun, interesting experiences. NFTs enable you to take that to a different level. They enable you to share it, make it more social, to gamify it, and to trade those experiences, whether you trade them like you would trading cards, or whether you actually trade them by selling on your membership when you're done. It creates a more liquid market for them, and it creates a marketing platform for them. So there's a lot of excitement that doesn't necessarily have to have a direct monetary value per transaction.
Can I stop you? So Mike and you, Behdad, both mentioned this idea of like selling on your membership, but that implies some degree of loss of control on the part of the winery, right? If members are selling so you're saying one member could just sell their membership to another member and the winery would not be involved?
Yeah, of course, but loss of control implies they have a huge degree of control in the first place. You rock up to a winery and you sign up and you get on the list. It's a different story if you're Screaming Eagle, which is another cult wine that sells for thousands, or Sine Qua Non, which sells for hundreds, if not thousands. Yes, they can handpick and cherry pick, but that's, again, we're back in the sub 1%. Those are the top 300 winemakers or wine producers in the world. And our community, part of our club, is all about that. And I'll talk about that in a bit. But anybody can rock up to, anyone sort of below that tier, and they sign up anyway. So I wouldn't overstate this notion of control. And I, having spoken to a lot of the winemakers and wineries, that's not how they think about it. They say, yeah, that's really interesting. If you want to sell this on in the market, and people can see that you have a lot of cool NFTs that are associated with a lot of amazing experiences, that could get me a whole new market and access. And right now, my main marketing channel is people who somehow see my wine or winery or see it in a tasting room and decide to come for a visit. So I actually think it's going to give them a much bigger market. And that's the way the ones that we're talking to at least conceptualize it as well.
So if you were to roll time back to the 90s, nobody had a website, right? If you were a winery, you why would you have a website? And then, everyone's like, oh, you should have a website. And then the first websites that kind of came out were just informational. And as it's moved forward to more e-commerce and now direct to consumer, I can't imagine a winery not having a website that did something, regardless of whether or not it was informational or storytelling or more immersive. Who knows? But every winery is going to utilize this technology in some form or another. So this idea of these emerging tech platforms, whether it's Metaverse or NFT or whatever, Web 3.0, just like the early days of the websites, I don't know that anyone really truly knows what exactly that might be. But $4 wine producers today have a website, as do the $400 wine producers.
Yeah, so like the metaverse is the digital technology all grown up and reached critical mass and creates this other separate universe that is called the metaverse, which I think a lot of our listeners probably are like, I've heard of that before, but what is that?
And I remember in the 90s sitting around scratching my head going, what is a website? Right.
Mm.
And I don't, it's sort of the 3-dimensional view of that today. Who knows what it's going to be, but it's going to be something.
It's been there. It's now being marketed in this whole new way, and Facebook's renamed themselves, and that's all great. But it's not a separate world, and the concept has always been there. It's not a separate, different space. It's just notionally tying those digital and physical worlds together. And the fact is that the tech has just gotten to the point now where it's much, much easier to do that in a compelling and seamless way, and much, much more low cost. Right. So to spin up your virtual winery, the way that Mike was talking about, would have been prohibitively expensive before. Now, you can do a virtual house viewing. That stuff costs nothing, right?
But Dodd, I think we're sitting here, we're talking about the supply side of the equation, right? What should producers be doing? But one of the dialogues that I'm having all the time with my clients is around the demand side of the equation, and the notion that consumption patterns in wine, particularly in the United States, are changing dramatically. And you have Gen Z, which has a different set of ideas. They're willing to try more things. They're willing to have brand loyalty, but they need more of a story. They need other drivers. They need it more alignment with social values and sustainability. And one of those dimensions that is critical to that evolving demographic is this idea of omni-channel experience. I'm the 22-year-old. I want to go on Instagram or TikTok and post my video and also be able to click through and buy a wine, but also when I show up at the winery, have them know who I am and have them have my history. I want this as the customer experience. And you cannot get there without embracing some of these new tech platforms. You just can't.
I think that's spot on. And when we talk to producers, the first thing we tell them is go where the consumers are, right? And don't worry about the producer problems. If what you build, if your first forays, and in my old world in VC, I called that product market fit. If you're not looking for product market fit and starting with a real friction or problem that the consumer has and that you're solving it, you're not delivering that utility that we talked about. And so you might be jumping on a fad, and people might even engage with it in the early days, but it's not going to be sustainable and real. When we started thinking about Club dVIN, we started with the problems that you laid out first, Michael, in your discussion. We started with authenticity and provenance. And that's what a lot of NFT projects were doing, where, traceability, the aftermarket commercial value for the producers. Again, that's a producer problem, not a consumer problem. And the more we thought about it, the more we realized people just don't care enough about that problem. They care, they just don't care enough. Everybody knows that 20% of investment grade wine or up to 20% of it is counterfeit or fake. They didn't care enough. They knew that these unicorn bottles had spotty provenance. They just didn't care enough because it was cooler to have a baller bottle at some event or in your cellar or whatever than it was to know 100% that it was guaranteed. And so the whole system reinforced that. And so when we sat down and thought about how we solved that problem, we realized that we had to solve a bigger problem for the consumer. And it's exactly that problem you were talking about, Mike. It's the 20-something or 30-something, or even me, heaven forbid, who loves to put my stuff on Instagram and who loves to share that experience and who wishes that experience had more authenticity, created more connectivity. For like, my most proud moments are when a winemaker reacts to my post when I post that I'm drinking their wine. I'm like, I will literally go home and tell my wife. And that's why we didn't focus so much on the authenticity and provenance side of NFTs. That has to be there. But we created really 3 NFTs, which create utility for both sides, but are focused on the consumer. One is what we call an allocation token, which is exactly what you were talking about, Mike. That's your membership to that producer's club, in effect. But it's in the form of an NFT. It's tradable. It can come with the privileges, and I think you described it beautifully. We've created that token, which is, relatively customizable to whatever benefits the winemaker wants to attach to it. And we can play with it, and we can share the learnings across winemakers and really, really support those smaller winemakers who just don't have the time or resources or marketing and customer service departments to think about this stuff. The second one is a digital cork, which is the authenticity, the traceability, the proof of provenance, the resale economics going back to the producer, one-to-one attached to a bottle. And that's kind of the commerce layer. But that's the layer that we realized, people cared 20% about, but didn't quite care enough about. Because you have to ask the user to change their behavior. When you consume this, you have to burn that NFT and let me know that you consumed that wine. And that gets you into the tragedy of the commons. Why the heck would somebody do that, break their flow and go through the trouble of doing it when they don't get any benefit for that? So to solve that, we created what we call tasting tokens. And tasting tokens are that Instagram experience version of your wine journey. So when you pop that cork, if you hold your phone to the bottle, it pops up a screen that allows you to mint those tasting tokens on the spot. And you can share those tasting tokens with the people who are enjoying the wine. And all of a sudden, it becomes a way of creating community. The beauty of wine is that it's inherently an experiential good. It's ephemeral. You drink it on an occasion. You're typically sharing it with people. It's often celebratory, particularly with these investment-grade wines. So the tasting token is an amazing thing to share. And now all of a sudden, everybody who participated in that has a proof of authenticity, that they had a real bottle and a real experience. And all of a sudden, the winemaker, the producer, has access to all that data. Now, most of them are flying blind. They don't even know who buys their wines for the most part, unless they're selling it direct to consumer, because it goes through such a complex chain. But with that NFT, not only do they know who bought it, they know when they drank it, where they drank it, with whom they drank it, what they ate with it, what else they drank with it. And it's all in the form that the consumers will love, because you can instantly post that tasting token to Instagram or whatever social platform you want. You can tuck it away in your digital cellar. And 5 years from now, you're going to have hundreds of these things in your digital cellar that you can sort through, filter, look at how, if I want to see every bottle of wine I've had with Mike in the last 5 years, or every bottle of wine I've had in my favorite restaurant, or every bottle of wine I've had from the Douro Valley, I can see that in a very experiential way.
Let me tell you a story, because as you're talking about the tasting token, this reminds me of this experience that I had. So I was going to Brussels, and I am a wine geek. I'm not a beer guy, but my friend said, "Oh, you're going to Brussels? You got to drink some West Vleteren 12."
You totally
And in my
do.
head, I'm like, immediately, I'm like, that sounds like a scotch. All right, I'm in. And he's like, no, it's a beer. It's the best beer in the world.
It's a Trappist beer. It's made in. Disclaimer. I lived in Amsterdam for
so
about
you
18
know
years.
about this.
So I've made the journey down. Yeah, like they sell it a couple of times a year. There's like a multi-mile line long of cars waiting to get their one crate allocation of this amazing Trappist beer that's still brewed. It's one of the few that's still brewed in the Abbey by the monks. Super cool, and it's delicious beer.
So I didn't know any of this. All I knew was that my friend said, you should drink some of this West Vleteren 12. And so I got to Brussels and I go to this bar and I go, yo, you got any West Vleteren 12? And the guy's like, yeah, we just got our allocation. Do you want one? Bring it on. And so the guy brings it out.
I'm glad you showed up with due modesty.
Yeah.
Nicely done, Michael.
You're calling yourself a baller for paying $15 for a beer, but go on.
Ooh, the dig from my time.
I have $15. Like I
got $15 to burn, baby. Give me a two.
That $15 on the counter really hard. Like, that's right.
I slapped a 20 and said, you keep the change, son. That's how I roll. No. So I literally, so the guy brings out this bottle of beer and it doesn't have a label. Like it's just a plain brown bottle of beer. And he opens the cap and he hands me the cap and I hand it back to him. I'm like, why are you giving me your trash? And he goes, you don't want the cap? And I go, I don't know. Am I supposed to have the cap? He goes, dude, you want the cap. And I go, okay. And I take the cap and I put it in my pocket. I drink the beer. It's good beer. I'm not a beer guy, whatever. And so I get home and like the next morning, I'm like, oh shit, what is this? How do I have a beer cap? So I Googled it and the beer caps were selling on eBay for like $8. I remember thinking like, that's how important like this experience is to certain people. And I think the tasting token that you just talked about, that's the digital version of the West Vleteren 12 beer cap.
That is a great reminder that I need to go talk to the guys at West Vleteren. That would be perfect one to put the tasting token on.
You know, it's funny, Mike and Behdad, I have a similar memory that just popped into my head from when I traveled to Scotland, where I believe Behdad is right now. When I was like in college, I remember I was interning at a magazine and my editor said, okay, when you're in Scotland, go into a tiny pub, get a postcard and put a little beer ring, a glass ring on that postcard and mail it to us at the office so we know you're having fun. And I remember doing that like back in the 90s. And so what you're saying, Behdad, is this is kind of like the digital version of sending that postcard with my beer ring, my ale ring. This makes so much sense now. I'm starting to understand it. And what you said earlier was so fascinating about collectors not even caring if their wine is counterfeit because what they were purchasing.
Care enough. Well, sorry to interrupt, Catherine. I don't want to say nobody cares. They just not quite enough to really change radically.
Yeah, but what that says to me is what they're purchasing is the experience. And so that's what you're capturing with Club dVIN is that experience rather than just the authenticity, which is not quite as interesting.
Absolutely.
When people ask me what Oregon wines I'm excited about right now, I always say traditional method sparkling wines. That is bottle fermented wines made in the Champenoise style. And, you know, one of my favorite producers is Lytle Barnett. And luckily enough for us, they are our generous sponsor for this episode of The Foretop. Lytle Barnett produces vintage-driven sparkling wines that really speak of the Eola Amity Hills appellation. And Rachel and I are here, and we are going to taste through some delicious Lytle Barnett bubblies today. Let's dip into the 2015 Brut. Now, this is 70% Pinot Noir and 30% Chardonnay. You know, it's interesting. It only has 1.5 grams per liter of dosage. Sorry, folks, I'm getting a little geeky here, but that makes it more of an extra Brut than a Brut. And yet it's really round and rich, and that richness just comes from the fruit. I can see this delicious and beautiful sparkling wine going with heartier foods. But, you know, Rachel is really the expert here, so I want to hear her thoughts.
Yeah, this one is a little bit softer, a little bit richer. To me, it's more floral. I get like magnolia blossoms, but then it's tied together with this just like perfectly ripe pear. So I'm a huge fan.
Well, folks, you need to try these wines for yourself. They are just delicious. So go to lytlebarnett.com to learn more about Lytle Barnett sparkling wines. That's lytle-barnett.com. That's Lytle Barnett. Thank you so much, Lytle Barnett, for sponsoring this episode. We really enjoy your wines. This episode of The Foretop is brought to you by Aubaine. Aubaine is French for windfall, and this refers to the serendipity around the Aubaine winemaking project, as well as to the strong winds off the Pacific that blow down the Van Duzer corridor and into the Eola Amity Hills in Oregon's Willamette Valley. These Pinot Noirs and Chardonnays are sourced from 2 estate vineyards in the Eola Amity Hills appellation, which I'm sorry, I just have to say this. It's my favorite appellation in the Willamette Valley. Those 2 vineyards are Anahata and the appropriately named Windfall Vineyard. The owner is Andy Lytle, whom we know at the Foretop from Lytle Barnett Sparkling Wines, and the winemaker is the extremely talented Isabelle Meunier. So let's dig into the 2019 Anahata Vineyard Estate Chardonnay from the Eola Amity Hills. Let's take a taste of this wine from Aubaine. This Chardonnay went through a spontaneous fermentation. It's so smooth. It's from a cool and slightly challenging vintage, which is something I always love, the 2019. And holy wow, I love this wine. It's fresh, it's smooth, it's spicy. I'm getting notes of vanilla bean. Rachel, what do you think about this Chardonnay?
I think it's wonderful. I get this like slightly underripe white peach to it, really nice minerality, and then it has this beautiful long finish to it. Just yum.
Yeah, I love that juicy acidity at the finish. Folks, you have got to try this Chardonnay. It's absolutely delicious. You can learn more about Aubaine wines at aubainewine.com, and I will spell that for you, AUBAINE wine.com. Thank you, Aubaine, for sponsoring the Foretop. We're loving this wine, and we really love working with you. Thanks. Well, can you tell us a little more kind of like how Club dVIN is structured financially? Like what's in it for the wineries? What's in it for the consumers? I don't want to make this an ad for your business, but because this is also new, I'm just very curious.
It's super important because I won't talk about it so much in the terms of our business, but more in terms of what we think the right model is, back to the challenges that Mike teed up. So the beauty and one of the premises and promises of blockchain and Web3 is that overused and abused word disintermediation, right? But the notion is cutting out the middleman and creating efficiency. Like, why should you have to get a customized contract every time you buy and sell, a house or some big asset? Why does it have to be a unique thing? Why can't we standardize all this stuff, streamline it, make it public domain, make the best practice, most bulletproof, safe, wonderful contract for all parties that everybody agrees on, and just make that happen? That's kind of part of the ideas behind it. And in line with that ethos, we didn't want to be yet another middle person making money off of the backs of winemakers. And we realized it would never be credible if we started charging ridiculous rent. So we did a few things in our business model. One, we set up a membership model for consumers. So you're a member in the community, your voice counts. We're going to be limited in size. We're going to have a drop of 5,000 at first. And so they're going to participate in the community. And with such a small group, you really have to, it's buy-in for the community. On the other end, for the producers, we reserved a substantial minority of the equity, around 35 to 40%. We're still locking down all the numbers for the producers as a block. That's not to say individual producers can have more or less. We're going to divvy it up amongst the total producers. And it's not about, if we sell it, everybody gets rich. We actually don't think there's an exit for it in that sense. It's all about making sure that the producers know that our interests are 100% aligned. And that we'll never do anything that's contrary to their interests, because we've set it up in such a way that they own a big chunk of the company from day one as a collective. And then the third thing that we did was to take Web3 normative rents for everything. So we're not going to take the current margins that various middle players in the chain play of 20, 30, 40, 50%. we're going to take that transactional margin of 2.5% for the services that we provide. And the logic behind that is that for tasting tokens to work and for digital corks to work, they have to be ubiquitous. But ultimately, if all of these bottles are transparently on the chain and all of the transaction history is there, if somebody starts gaming the system, you'll always be able to trace it. And so it's the transparency and not the tech. But in order to get that transparency, consumers have to want it and producers have to want it. Producers already want it. We think that tasting tokens are going to make consumers want it enough. And so if we can drive ubiquity of digital corks and tasting tokens and effectively do that largely at cost or for reasonable rents, that's going to change the game of the industry and really help solve that sour grapes problem.
What's interesting to me is if you kind of step back around about the product wine, which is obviously we all love, and just think about just products and trying to run it like a business. We talked about the supply side, we talked about the demand side, but there's another whole piece of this that if you think about it as a business that is extraordinarily important, and that is the compliance side. From a consumer perspective, even if you're not a public company, we're going to want to know like what your carbon emissions are, and what your social impact is and your environmental impact. And you know what?
Ooh, this is interesting.
Yeah.
So you're talking like accountability all along the supply chain. Like,
it's coming. Oh yeah.
This is in an NFT. It can't be faked.
Yeah, so we actually have done this already for another client that's not in the wine vertical. And they were having, in their case, they were having more product returns than they wanted to. And so they attached some NFTs to the whole supply chain process. And through that, they were able to figure out like where the issues were coming from. So, is it a packaging issue? Is it a production issue? Is it a quality issue? Is it a shipping issue? Like, where is the issue? And through that, they were able to decrease their number of returns, which has a direct impact on bottom line.
In my previous life, when I was with BCG Digital Ventures, we built the blockchain sustainability platform for the World Wildlife Fund in aquaculture for exactly that reason. It was all about traceability. Any individual piece might be faked, but if you get enough or close enough to 100% transparency, that's very, very hard to hack. And that's the foundational ethos of the blockchain: transparency, multiple ledgers all over the place with all of the data fully visible. And when you find use cases that bridge those two things, that's when things get really, really fun and interesting.
Can I jump in though with a little devil's advocate comment, which is, doesn't it take a lot of energy to mint an NFT? I mean, if we're using it to hold companies accountable for their environmental impact, doesn't it take a ton of energy to do that?
So let's talk about that for a little bit, because it's a great question, and it's probably one of the first ones we get when we talk to producers, because every producer cares about sustainability.
Yeah.
And for the most part, they're in the business of agriculture, and everybody in the business cares about it, not just because their consumers care, but because it impacts their everyday, right? So a lot of that talk is around the Ethereum blockchain, because Ethereum is currently a proof of work based blockchain, which essentially, the more computing power you have, the more the chain functions the way it's supposed to, as opposed to a proof of stake chain, which relies more on big blocks of ownership, arguing that people who own a ton of the currency or the platform won't want to devalue it. It's effectively the cost of flipping a light switch to mint an NFT, as opposed to $100 of energy to mint an Ethereum NFT. And time will solve this. Within a couple of years, there are a couple of chains already that are promising carbon neutral or net zero.
Well, Behdad and Mike, this has been so fascinating, and I feel like I could just keep asking you questions all day. But in your case, you're both in Europe, so it's evening for you. So I feel like I need to let you get back to your lives. Okay, so Mike, do you have time to share a dessert wine course with us? This is where we go around our virtual foretop and each quickly share something we've been enjoying this week.
I'm going to share a wine that I think is amazing, and nobody knows about it. And everyone should start getting on this, which is Pascherang du Wiekbol, which for those of you who know Petit Mansang and the region of Jurançon, it's just this delicious, beautiful dessert wine. But what people don't know is that in the nearby town of Maturin, they also make a sweet dessert wine from Petit Mansang called Pascherang du Wiekbol. And it is delicious. And I'm telling everybody they should get it. So, which is stupid on my part because it's a small supply and demand's going to go up. And I screwed myself on pricing. Whatever. It's wine. Like we should all drink more bitchin' wine. So find Pascherang du Wiekbol.
Cool.
That's a great dessert course. Thank you.
I'll toss one out to Mike, or in tribute to Mike. There's this great Portuguese wine which is called Coche. I think it's probably pronounced Coche, and it's made by Newport, the famous port maker. But it's a still white, and I was blinded it the first time a few years ago. And with a bunch of wine nerds and experts in the room, everybody thought it was at least Premier Cru, if not Grand Cru, white Burgundy. And it's at the kind of more like a $50 price point type of wine, and it's just absolutely amazing. And it's probably more findable than
Literally, I'm in the Douro. How's that spelled? C-O-S?
Well, wait.
like Coche de Riz. It's C-O-C-H-E.
Like Coche de Riz. Okay. So you actually could mistake it for one of the probably the world's best white Burgundy.
C-O-C-H-E.
C-O-C-H-E.
Oh, I am tracking that shit down tonight.
Cool.
And make sure you keep the cork and sell it for $8 on eBay.
There you go.
How is that not a trademark problem? Oh, well.
I was thinking about cheese that I've had recently, and I've had this in more than one store here in California. It's an Australian. It's called Meredith Dairy sheep and goat cheese. It's like little blocks of. It looks like little blocks of feta. It's a jar with the cheeses that are the pieces of feta that are floating in olive oil and spices and herbs. The taste is bonkers. It's rich, layered. It's incredible stuff.
Yum.
That reminds me, by the way, what do you call a Greek cheese store on the Metaverse?
I don't know.
Fetaverse.
Oh my God.
Dear Lord.
Fetaverse. Okay.
That just ruined my dessert right there. That's what happened.
I never met a bad joke. I never liked.
Okay.
Okay, I gotta put the kibosh on this and share my dessert course really quickly.
Fine.
As our listeners know, I am a historical fiction freak, and I've been going down a little Philip Kerr rabbit hole, getting into some dark German history, hard-boiled police fiction, and Metropolis is sort of a classic Philip Kerr novel. And I just have to say, if you're into detective novels and wine, every time wine comes up in his work, I just start laughing out loud. It's just so great. And so I just randomly pulled a page open just now, and I'll just read. I gave him 5 marks and told him to bring us a bottle of German champagne and 2 glasses. He was back quickly with a bottle of Henkel and 2 enamelware cups. No glasses here, he said, only prison mugs. And it's just like every time this author mentions wine, it's just so funny. So if you're interested in the Weimar Republic or Nazi Germany and spy novels and detective novels, check out Philip Kerr. That's my dessert. And thank you, guests. This has been such a fascinating conversation.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much to our ingenious panelists. You can find Mike Juergens online at drinkingandknowingthings.com. Y'all know where that comes from. drinkingandknowingthings.com. Little Game of Thrones action there. Mm-hmm. Bhutan Wine, BHUTAN wine.com. And SoCalRum.com, SoCalRum.com.
And you can find Behdad Shahsavari at clubdvin.com, and that's club and then dVIN.
And you can find me, Martin Reyes, at reyeswinegroup.com. And importantly, here, we're in the middle of June, NapaThrives.org, But not only can you find me at napathrives.org, I co-founded the symposium of all things grown-up sustainability and regenerative farming, but also you can find Catherine there, because Catherine, you are poised to be one of our moderators in the high-powered expertise panel on in June here coming up on phasing out pesticides and soil health, something that we've spoken about in the Four Top. So I'm thrilled that we're just days away.
Yeah, it's going to be really dirty, actually.
Oh, steady.
I'm going to be so dirty. And by the way, Martin gets so much credit for organizing Napa Thrives, founding Napa Thrives. Martin, you've done an amazing job with that, and I'm so delighted to be helping you just for one day. I can't wait for it.
So where can we find you, Catherine?
Oh, yeah, you can find me at catherinecole.com, but even better, please go to thefourtop.org. And listeners, hey, are you thinking of incorporating NFTs into your wine business? Let us know. Visit thefourtop.org, where you can find our social media handles and tweet at us or Insta message us. Let us know your thoughts about NFTs.
And this is Rachel, asking you to please subscribe to The Four Top on your favorite podcast app and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts so that others can find the pod. Signing out here from the high-fiber, protein-packed city of Portland, Oregon. Thanks so much for listening. Bye-bye.
This has been the Four Top Podcast. Catherine Cole is our executive producer, Izzy Kramer is our senior producer, and I'm Keelan King, sound supervisor. We are also assisted by audio editor, Michelle Richards, our production assistant, Rachel Grossman, creative assistant, Lex Rule, and editorial assistant, Nick Toole. Please visit our website, thefourtop.org, to learn more about us, listen to back episodes, reach out to us on social media, and purchase books written by our amazing panelists. And if you have not already subscribed to The Four Top on iTunes or Spotify, please do so and leave us a rating. Stay safe out there, and thanks for listening.